Hey there and welcome back to another My Hero Academia video. And a couple of days ago we saw the release of two new OVAs set during the Endeavour agency arc. The first was a baseball episode, and I reviewed that yesterday, and it was glorious. And so I expected more of the same from this episode, which features the Endeavour agency working to track down the graffiti artist, Mr. Smiley. And just based on that brief synopsis, it already seemed a bit ridiculous. And honestly it was, but in the best possible way. And so with all that being said, let's get into this thing. So we start off the episode with a brief voiceover by Deku talking about who he is and what his life's looked like for the past 10 months. Before he moves on to give us a recap on when this little special's going to be set, and obviously that's in the winter during the Endeavour agency arc, before explaining how the work studies function for those that might have forgotten, or who simply don't know. Basically, he's giving a bit of handy exposition so that anybody's able to watch along and kind of understand the context surrounding what's going on. Whilst they may not know the full details, they do have some ideas about things. And honestly, I actually like that they included this. It didn't take up much time, and it really just helps you get back into the mindset of the show. It only gets frustrating when they regularly do this kind of stuff mid-season. And then, before the intro plays, we see a bunch of cops collapsed on the ground laughing as our mysterious artist walks away from the scene of his crime, leaving behind a giant mural of a gorilla wearing a sign that says love and peace. And after we get back from the intro, we get even more weird artwork. One of a rabbit beating down some cops, a frog holding a flower, a naked clown Cupid, and yeah, a whole bunch more. At least 50 according to the police, as they beg Endeavour to use his agency to help them find the culprit. And of course, Endeavour being Endeavour, he refuses to help at first. After all, he's the #1 hero. He goes after the big timers, dangerous criminals who could hurt people. Not some random vandal who's simply doing some illegal street art. And it isn't even until he learns that Mr. Smiley has a quirk that makes you collapse on the ground laughing for 2 hours at a time that he even agrees to have his sidekicks on patrol keep an eye out for the vandal. And you know what? Fair enough. Have they even asked any other pro heroes to go after this guy? The other lesser heroes do exist for a reason, right? He's right. The cops should learn to handle shit like this themselves. Oh well. Anyway, he decides that he's going home as the case has become too trivial for him, before we learn that Banksy, of all people, has managed to remain notable in this futuristic society, as they name drop him in relation to the case. And I also enjoyed how seriously everybody was taking this, except for Endeavour, who went home, and Bakugo, who seems to be the only one who thinks it's absurd that they're treating this man like a serious threat. In the car ride home, Endeavour vents to his driver about how he already has so much he needs to focus on with the Paranormal Liberation Front, and he doesn't have any time for this kind of thing. Of course, this is all clearly leading up to the punchline of him arriving home to find his house has been graffitied, which is going to kick off his blood feud, and he'll put every single case on hold, including the Paranormal Liberation Front, just to make this one guy pay. And of course, as I figured, this is exactly what happens. Hell, he even burns through all of his clothes in his rage. And it's a good thing he had his costume on underneath it. We then immediately cut to the next day, where Endeavour has decided to dedicate all of his agency's resources into capturing Mr. Smiley, as he's now decided that this guy is his personal nemesis. They then get a call from the B team telling them they've located Mr. Smiley, and thus, our hero, his sidekicks, and his students all head out into the field, only to discover the B team collapsed in hysterics. And Jesus, laughing uncontrollably for 2 hours? That would probably kill people with existing health issues, right? It would be such a strain on the body. Mr. Smiley's probably an unintentional killer. And speaking of getting killed, Deku finds Mr. Smiley, who looks about as ridiculous as you'd expect somebody called Mr. Smiley to be, and tries to apprehend him with a running leap. But he gets smileyed, starts laughing, and then bulldozes into a wall as he can't control his body, bleeding profusely from the head afterwards. Ouch. Endeavour then tries his luck next and gets smileyed as well, also losing control of his quirk and melting into the ground. Oof, lots of property damage here, hey. Bakugo follows up Endeavour's attempt and actually gets an attack off by closing his eyes, but Smiley has spring shoes and jumps over it and then gets him when he opens his eyes to check. And goddamn, this is a great quirk. It's kind of sad this is a one-time OVA and he's not a legit character with plot relevance. He would have been an amazing hero character for sure. Todoroki then has his turn up next, and he actually manages to get one up on Mr. Smiley, trapping his feet in ice and remaining at range so his quirk can't work on him. But it's too bad because Mr. Smiley has smiley grenades somehow that project his face, and thus Todoroki gets got. And damn if he does not have one of the funnier laughs, completely holding it in and just collapsing on the ground, barely making a noise and occasionally snorting. Honestly, he kind of sounded like when somebody has food or drink in their mouth and then starts laughing. It's kind of ridiculous. We then get to hear from the man himself as Mr. Smiley graffitis a wall, declaring himself a wandering genius artist, and honestly true. He has terrible technique with his paintbrushes and only uses blue and pink, and yet he manages to make stuff like this? Really? He is actually a genius with the brush, although he does then become the artistic version of an incel as he proclaims that the art world is full of hacks who can't recognize his superior talent, and thus he does what he does. He wanders the world forcing his art on other people, no matter what. And as he finishes up his monologue, Vernon and the flaming sidekicks turn up and, well, it's not like these guys were ever actually going to have a chance of catching him, were they? And so we cut to 2 hours later, where our heroes have seemingly recovered and return to base to create Plan B. And of course, the majority of them feel like he's already publicly shamed and embarrassed them, and thus they want revenge. And so Deku formulates his plan of action, which involves using a robot to capture him instead. As of course, being a robot, it's not going to laugh at his quirk, and thus he loses his advantage completely. And the robot even shows off its prowess at capturing villains by snaring Bakugo in a net, before the call comes in that Smiley has been found again. So Deku, Todoroki, and the robot head to the scene, where the robot immediately dies. Because for some reason it's programmed to be able to feel emotions, and thus finds the quirk funny, and it short circuits, and dies. So that was a bit anticlimactic, and then Bakugo tries to ambush him out of nowhere, but of course he gets Smiley'd. And Deku crashes into another wall after getting Smiley'd, and Todoroki gets hit with another one of the grenades. And so, the big three get clapped once more by this random street artist, and once again, I'm feeling sad that this guy's never going to appear again. Back at headquarters, Bakugo is once again fired up to the max after being severely embarrassed by Mr. Smiley, whilst May's mourning the death of one of her precious babies. And they then try to explain away how the robot was even affected by the quirk, but honestly, it didn't really make much sense to me and it seemed like a bit of a cop-out, but whatever. Endeavour takes Bakugo aside and tells him that they're going to do some private training in order to team up to take this guy down for good. And this was cool to see. The majority of Endeavour scenes are with his family, and when training, are mostly with Shoto. I don't know, I just feel like this helped to give him an extra dimension in his character and flesh out how tactical he is. And it also kind of shows off how similar the two characters are. Endeavour is simply Bakugo's final form. But meanwhile, Deku takes the opposite approach and starts to think about why Mr. Smiley might be doing this. What is it that pushed him to become a vandal? Showing off more of that analytical side of his character as opposed to the action-oriented approach that Bakugo sometimes takes. Anyway, somehow Deku has a full-on dossier on this guy, and he learns that he's a mostly failed artist who didn't get the recognition he felt he deserved and didn't get accepted into any art college. And ever since then, he's become a wandering artist, drawing his art wherever he can. And of course, this gets into Deku's head as he's reminded about how desperately he wanted to become a hero even before he had a quirk, and no one believed in him. Nobody thought that he could do it. And this scene made it very clear that Deku was going to talk him down from the ledge, so to speak. And whilst this is going on, we have a brief look at some really irrelevant thugs who are planning a job, and so these fools are likely going to be our last-minute surprise villains for Mr. Smiley to defeat, because once again, he needs that redemption arc. It's so very obvious. In the meantime, however, Endeavour and Bakugo are perfecting their coordinated attack strategy where Endeavour calls out directions and Bakugo follows them with a blindfold on. And what the hell? How do they manage to do this in a couple of hours or maybe a day? And honestly, I get that his personality sucks sometimes, but Bakugo is just one of the most skillful characters in this show, even amongst the pros. God damn, he's doing this blind? But of course, Deku has his own plan in the works, which involves talking Mr. Smiley into stopping his vandalism. And to help facilitate this, he has used his website building skills that have come out of nowhere to make Mr. Smiley a web page to display his art. And honestly, this felt a little bit dated. Why not use social media? I feel like that would be a way better place to start, no? Anyway, they get a call that Smiley's inside a building doing his thing, and so the squad pulls up to take him down, and Bakugo and Endeavour's plan starts working. And working well. And they're actually about to win before Deku interferes, allowing Smiley to take off Bakugo's blindfold and give him the old Smiley special. And then Deku hits Smiley with the Talk no Jutsu and convinces him that vandalism is bad and promoting your art in the proper way is good. And now they're friends, and Smiley and Shoto and Deku defeat the robbers when they arrive, and Smiley gets himself interviewed for the news and unleashes his quirk on everybody. And like I said earlier, some people probably died from this. And I mean, even Aizawa laughed, so Miss Joke is in shambles right now. And Mr. Smiley becomes an artistic sensation, and it's all happy endings for everybody. And so, that brings us to the end of the episode. And I think this one was good. It was decently funny and had an engaging story. And I especially liked that it actually involved some of the more relevant characters. But at the same time, I'm not sure it was as good as the baseball episode, probably because the ending felt a bit rushed. But it was still good overall, and I had a good time. But anyway, those were just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. If you've seen it, what did you think of it? You like it, hate it, somewhere in between? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.